I'm Dustin Newman. I live in Lloydminster, Alberta, and I run a small oil company. I'm making this video because, quite honestly, I'm fed up with the state of the oil industry in Canada, and I think it's embarrassing to us. I have 2 kids. I live in Lloydminster. I'm a fairly average Canadian. I coach my son's hockey team. I have a cat and a dog and 12 chickens. But running the oil company that I started 3 years ago, which had always been a dream of mine, I raised the money from family and friends to start the oil company. And over the last 3 years, it's really taught me a lot about how the world works, essentially, and how oil companies work. Right now, Western Canadian oil is getting just over $20 a barrel on the world market, and the world is getting $70 a barrel. Those just seem like numbers, but what ends up happening with that is massive. As the oil company, we sell our oil either by rail or by pipeline. Most of our oil actually gets sold by rail down to refineries in the US that pay just over $20 a barrel for the oil. They turn around and sell the oil at $70 a barrel, which means that most of the money from the oil actually doesn't stay in the Canadian economy, doesn't pay for truckers and rig guys and taxes in Canada. It ends up going down to the States and supporting their economy, and none of it comes back. So, we get paid $20 a barrel. They can sell it. They don't even have to refine the oil. They can turn around and sell it for $70. And you can go, well, that's unfair. The refinery shouldn't be making all the money. Why are they only paying you that much? And the reason why they pay us that much is because we can't actually get the oil anywhere else to sell it. We send all our oil to a couple of places, and they have so much of it that they can pay us whatever they want, essentially. And until we increase the number of spots we can ship our oil to, they can continue to pay us that low dollar. And the funny thing is that it's actually, the billions of dollars a year that are going into the American economy are probably helping Trump win a second term, which is, I'm sure, what the activists on the pipeline side don't want to hear or don't want to think about. When it comes to, oil companies get put into a bad light, and maybe for a good reason for some of the time, but sometimes it isn't talked about what the oil companies actually add to Canada. When you look at all the taxes we pay, we pay land taxes to the municipal governments to upkeep the roads so that we can move our equipment out on it. That's thousands of dollars a year for every well we have. 50% of every barrel of oil we produce goes right to the government, and that goes into government funds for building hospitals and schools and paying teachers and doctors and nurses. And then we also pay GST on everything, obviously, and then we also pay income tax at the end of the year. When you look at the federal transfer payments that comes out of Alberta and Saskatchewan, there's billions of dollars that goes to the rest of the country to support programs in other provinces. So it's not just improving Alberta and Saskatchewan, it's improving the country. When I look at our operation, it's frustrating because you always have a base set of costs when you're running your company. You always have to pay the people that operate the wells and transfer the fluid and the rigs to get the wells going. And you're always going to have that base cost. And the difference between $20 a barrel and $25 is huge, because that extra $5 a barrel is all profit that would then get used to help grow the company and make everybody more profitable. The lower that price we get paid, the tighter it becomes and the harder it is to do anything as a company. We can't employ as many people. We can't spend money to increase our productivity. And that's the headwind we've been facing for the last 3 years. When you look at $70 a barrel versus $20, I look at how busy we could be as a company, and how many more people we'd employ in our communities. And the funny thing is about our communities is that in a community like Lloydminster, the big companies typically don't do well. It's the small companies that do, just because it's a small community. And all the big companies are leaving, essentially. And the only people who are staying are people who call Lloyd home, who do business in this small area. And we don't want to leave. We won't leave. And quite honestly, I can't blame the big companies. If you can produce a barrel of oil for $20 a barrel in Canada or $70 a barrel elsewhere, you'd be dumb to stay in Canada. Absolutely idiotic to stay in Canada. There's also trickle-down effects when it comes to the oil industry as well. As oil companies go bankrupt in Alberta and Saskatchewan, those wells, if no one else wants them, end up on the orphan well list, and the government has to abandon those wells. In normal operations, the oil companies abandon the wells. But when companies go bankrupt, they go into the orphan well fund. Now there's an orphan well, there's money in place to abandon those wells, but if too many companies go bankrupt too quickly, it becomes a real issue. Now normally if a company went bankrupt in decent times, or if the oil was $70 a barrel, lots of companies would step up and probably take on those wells because there's always some opportunity with the wells that are there. But if you're just trying to survive and make it from month to month, you don't take those risks because you are just trying to survive. Now I know that environmental activists, what they want is they think they're trying to save the world, and that if they stop oil production from Western Canada, that they can make that happen. They look at the rising CO2 and blame the oil companies. There's some problems with that though. And one is that even if we produce no oil in Canada, CO2 levels in the world would still go up. And the reason for that is that economies, China and India have huge economies that are growing, and it doesn't matter. Canada's so insignificant on the global scale. One country cannot save the world. The other problem is that even if we wanted to change our economy in one foul swoop, we can't. I look at a car like a Tesla. I'd love a Tesla car. The problem is they cost $100,000, and I don't have $100,000 laying around to buy an electric car. Would I love one? Sure, they're probably the coolest car out there. The problem is that everyone else in Canada is kind of in the same boat. And there's very smart people working on this. Obviously, Elon Musk is a genius, and he's working on ways to solve our problem with emissions and CO2. And we're getting there. God, you look at the changes in the last 10 years from where we went 10 years ago to now on something like electric vehicles, and the change is massive, and it's coming. But to kill our oil industry, to speed up the process, it's not going to help. It's just going to make us poorer. And in the end, we're still going to need some oil and gas. How do we heat our homes in the winter? We're still going to need natural gas. How are we going to run our power plants? We're still going to need some natural gas. We can't get everything from solar and wind. As much as we try, we're still going to need natural gas to run some power plants. And then on the oil side, we still have lots of products that we use plastic. So we're going to still need oil. We're still going to need to pave our roads, which is going to require oil. So it's not like we can kill the oil industry. It's not going to happen. Activists can talk a good game, but life's far more complicated than that. You can't solve all the world's problems by doing one thing. It's going to take a long-term concerted effort, and we're going to need some very smart people to come up with some ways to solve the problems we do have. And I guess that leads to, well, what needs to happen to actually build pipelines in this country? The provincial governments can help all they want, but ultimately it's the federal government who has to make this happen. I guess, well, the BC government is fighting hard to prevent a pipeline expansion from going to the coast, which is almost hilarious because You know, we already ship coal from BC that comes out of Alberta, out of the BC coast. The Americans ship oil from Alaska down the Inside Passage. And Vancouver Airport has a pipeline running from Washington to deliver jet fuel so they can run their airplanes. But when it comes to Alberta oil, they fight tooth and nail so that we can't have access to the ocean. Which is also funny because freaking countries have gone to war by not having access to the ocean. But here we are in the same country, and we're getting fought tooth and nail. But the biggest problem is the federal government. They're the ones who can make this process happen or not. They just need the will. Right now in the environmental process, and let's get real, the safety and environmental standards in Canada are some of the best in the world when it comes to the oil industry. You go anywhere else in the world, you won't find the environmental standards where we clean up our spills and make sure spills don't happen as much as possible. If they do happen, we clean them up. You know, I've seen pictures in Russia where there's pools of oil laying on the ground that no one's cleaning up ever. I can't imagine going to Nigeria and having environmental or safety standards that they have here. There's no chance. Lots of countries adopt the standards that we put in place in Canada to protect our environment, to protect our people. So when it comes to getting a pipeline approved, what the government has done is essentially put so much red tape in front that it kills the process. And the pipeline companies don't need the government to put in money to help build the pipelines. They will build them because there's enough value in putting them into the ground. All they need is the federal government to quit trying to appease everyone. And I always look at the federal government kind of as the same role as a parent. If you try and appease your kids all the time, you're going to be miserable. What you do is do what's best in the long term as a family, for the family. And that's what the federal government should be doing. It shouldn't be trying to appease groups of people here and there. It has to look at what is in the best interest of the country. And appeasing to environmental activists so they can be more morally superior. God, it's sickening. And as an entrepreneur who's put his own time and money on the line for something, to look in the future and not see an end in sight to this problem is very frustrating. Because Justin Trudeau to this point has shown no inkling that he's going to make any progress on this issue. And I guess the Canadian public hasn't shown a real willingness. It doesn't seem to want to change who's running the country at the moment.